Hey, what's up, friends? Grant Baldwin here. Welcome back to the Speak Aloud podcast. Excited for you to join us today. Today, we're going to be talking about all things books and writing books. And I'm excited about today's conversation because we have not one, but two special guests. We have Ariel Curry as well as Liz Morrow. And Liz and I actually go way back here because if you have read or are familiar with The Successful Speaker, you go to the acknowledgement section there, you are going to see her mention, not just because like, oh, Liz is just a lovely person here. Liz actually did a lot of the writing, the editing for the book itself, and so she was kind of the wizard behind the curtain for that entire project. And so even though my name may be on the cover, Jeff Goins' name may be on the cover, Liz was really the secret sauce behind the whole project. So excited to have her join us today. Liz, Ariel, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Yeah.
Now, we're going to be talking about books. You're both wizards in the book space. Liz, I mentioned you. Let's start with you. Kind of give us like a quick 30, 60-second snapshot here of your background in the book space.
Yeah, sure. So many years ago, I started working with our mutual friend, Jeff, who, again, worked on your book with you. I assisted him for a while. We worked and helped start up his agency, Fresh Complaint. And then a few years ago, I went out on my own and started freelancing. I am primarily a ghostwriter. I often will use the term collaborative writer because I think it just better describes the ghostwriting process. But a lot of people don't understand what a collaborative writer is. So yes, I'm a ghostwriter. I collaborate with people. My clients are generally entrepreneurs, thought leaders, industry experts who have a message. They usually have a pretty big platform. They almost always have traditional book deals, and they're writing a book about their primary message, and they need help turning their expertise into a best-selling book. And that's what I help them do. I work, primarily with people exactly like you who've got an audience and want to spread it further and wider with a book.
And you're excellent to work with, and I would highly recommend and endorse you, which I have before. All right, Ariel, give us the snapshot on you.
Yeah. So I have worked in the traditional publishing space for a long time. I kind of got my career in academic publishing, and I worked at a company called Corwin for many, many years, almost a decade I was there. And I kind of ended my career there as a senior editor. So I was doing acquisitions. I was the person who was finding new book projects. I was negotiating contracts. I was, working with agents and authors and kind of doing all the things. And then I left that job about 3 years ago to kind of do what Liz was doing. I was ghostwriting. I was kind of doing my own thing, working independently. And I loved it. But just as of a couple months ago, I decided to rejoin the corporate publishing space. So now I am back as a senior editor at Source Books, acquiring for their nonfiction team. And it is a lot of fun. It's amazing being kind of on this side of the desk again. I feel like it's fun having both experiences now, having been an author myself, having been, partnering with authors, and now kind of on the other side of the table. So that's me.
So let's start with this. I mean, obviously, a lot of people who are watching, listening to this are speakers or building their speaking business. And one of the things we've always talked about is speaking is a way to share a message. And there's a lot of other ways to do that, and including, books is an obvious one there. So does that mean, though, that every speaker should write a book? Like, who should write a book? Who shouldn't write a book?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Certainly, I would never say every speaker has to write a book. Nobody has to do anything to build the kind of career that they want to do. So I will say one thing that comes up a lot in acquisitions, and Ariel and I both, well, now Ariel acquires books, so she sees lots of book proposals come across her desk. I write a decent amount of book proposals and work really closely with literary agents to write and pitch them. And speaking and book writing, just of the two mediums of getting out a message, are maybe the two that work the best hand in hand. Like, one of the things when people build the platform section of their book proposal, they often will think of social media. It's the first thing that comes to mind when people are like, okay, I'll write my platform numbers. How many Instagram followers do I have? But there's a lot more that goes into platform, and speaking is a really important one of them, and often can weigh much heavier than social media or website hits, because speaking is one of the methods proven time and time again. And again, agents and editors know this, that moves books. It really does. You can do bulk buys in lieu of speaking fees. People who hear you speak, if they like you, they almost always will go buy a book, either, online or from the back of the room. So those two mediums work really, really well together. Do you have to? No, you certainly don't. Like, if you don't want to have a book, I would say that's fine. But if you have a message that you want to spread, it is a great way to do it. And also, if you don't want to write it, like, I just pitched myself at the top of this show, you don't even have to do it on your own. You can hire help, and you can hire somebody to help you take your speech and expand it into a book. And those two things can work really well together, especially if you have a business or like a higher offering, that those can be great, leads for. I'm sure, you go into that a lot in your course, but yeah, you don't have to, but it's a great idea.
Yeah, for sure. So Ariel, one thing I'd be curious from your perspective is, now that you're kind of on the acquisition side of you're looking for potential books to publish. First of all, let's maybe kind of demystify and kind of break down, because I think sometimes people go like, okay, I want to write a book and I have an idea, or I do some speaking, and now I guess I just need to get an agent and talk to a publisher, and like all of a sudden it just all magically works out. And so maybe even kind of define like who like should legitimately consider traditional publishing. And, obviously in this day and age, like self-publishing and hybrid options
Mhm.
are much more viable than they were 10, 20 years ago or so. And so I think in kind of a similar way to speaking, a lot of people assume like, okay, I want to be a speaker. How do I get an agent or a bureau? And it's like, they're just not relevant for like 99% of speakers.
Mhm.
And the same way that that's the case for authors. And so who needs an agent and who should consider traditional publishers, and for everyone else, like, should we just go to the self-publishing? Is that good or bad? Maybe kind of explain the differences between them all.
Yeah, I mean, this is a big question, and it's kind of one of the earliest things that probably gives a lot of potential authors or prospective authors anxiety, because they're like, there are so many options. When you start to research, like, how do I publish a book? It gets really overwhelming really fast, which is one of the reasons why we wrote our book, which I know we'll talk about in a minute. But we kind of wanted to demystify that process. So here's the thing. There are different business models in publishing. Self-publishing is one business model where the author takes on the risk and most of the reward, right? In traditional publishing, the publisher takes on most of the risk and most of the reward. So that's kind of the catch for those two things. It's, do you want to be responsible for doing, all of the production, all of the editing and all of the cover design and all of the interior stuff and all of the distribution? That would be everything that you are responsible for as an author when you do self-publishing. Or do you want to partner with a company that is really expert at that already has all those channels, developed? They've been doing this for a very long time. They've got kind of all of those avenues open, and they will partner with you to do a book, and that's kind of the traditional publishing model. So there's really not like a right or wrong answer. Obviously, Liz and I both have a lot of experience in traditional publishing. I would say we probably skew a little bit towards that model, just because we know it and we love it and we've seen it work really well for a lot of people. But it also doesn't work very well for a lot of people. And if you are someone who is highly entrepreneurial and you feel like you really value having a lot of creative control over the end product, and you don't mind doing the hard, kind of manual work of putting all of those systems in place and really championing your book yourself, then self-publishing could be a great choice for you if you really care about keeping all of the profits too, and you don't mind the work that goes along with it. So does that help to answer that question? That
Yeah,
part of the
well, and I think it
question.
also like it's important to kind of clarify here of, even if you said like, okay, based on those and kind of the pros and cons between both, like, I don't know, maybe I want to do traditional. That sounds more appealing to me. But just because you want to do traditional doesn't necessarily mean that a
Right.
traditional publisher would be interested in you. So from your side, where on an acquisition, and maybe even kind of explain like what your role would be
Yeah.
like in terms of acquisitions for a publisher, and what is it that you would be looking for, and maybe like the idea is super important, but also just like you mentioned, kind of the platform is important. So kind of like, how do
Yeah.
you rank some of the criteria that you'd be looking for to determine whether or not you would actually consider taking someone on a book project?
Right. Yeah. Because it's one thing to say as an author, I want to traditionally publish because working with a partner sounds great, but then the partner has to also want to work with you. So, great question. I view my role as like I'm an investor. So, my job is to go out and find the really great ideas and the really great authors who are going to give me a big return on the investment that I make into publishing their book, and that my company makes into publishing their book. So, Platform does matter a lot because I want to have confidence that when we produce a book and we put tens of thousands of dollars into creating this thing and then warehousing it, and we've got thousands of copies that we have to move out of our warehouse, I want to know that that author is going to be able to move those copies, right? So that's kind of the biggest thing. Platform is definitely a major consideration, but also the quality of the idea comes in really, really important here. I can't understate or overstate this enough. The quality of the idea matters because people want something that is surprising. People want something that is new, and it's really hard to define. This is where a lot of like people in publishing start to get very wishy-washy, and the qualifications that we're looking for become very like esoteric and abstract because we're like, we just want something new, we want something exciting, and you're like, well, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Well, what I view it as meaning, and what Liz and I kind of tell people, is look at the landscape. Because if you are a speaker in, some area of business world or wherever, whatever your specialty is, you look at the landscape and you know all of the major players in that landscape, and you know what they're saying, and you know what their arguments are, and you know what their unique contributions are. And then you have to say, okay, what do I have to say that is different from all of them that they're forgetting about? Or I have, an argument to pick with all of my colleagues in this area. I kind of view it like you're contributing to this conversation about a topic, and you have to know what everyone else is saying so that you can contribute something really unique and valuable to that conversation. And I want to know, as an editor, what is that thing? What do you have to say that is going to stand out from the rest of the crowd and offer something pretty valuable and distinct from everything else that they can already get? Because there's a lot of competition out there, and it is hard to move books if you don't have that unique differentiator.
Yeah, I've always said, like, I would much rather sell, some of a higher ticket training program than try to sell a $20 book. Like, selling books is freaking hard, and I know you two are in the thick of that right now. Liz, let's talk about this for a second. When like Ariel just said, when you're trying to come up with the idea for it, part of what you're trying to do is to come up with something that's kind of a unique angle or spin, something new and kind of different. But at the same time, like, there's a bajillion books that are out there and a bajillion more that are being published every single year. So it becomes kind of difficult to say, like how many other spins on this topic or angles can we come up with here? Like, hasn't everything already been said? And so in your case, like, you've done a lot on the proposal side, which is kind of like taking, like, all right, before we even start writing the book, let's just think through, like, what is the idea here? So how does a speaker really determine whether they're traditionally or self-publishing? Like, how do you determine, like, do I have a good enough idea here? Is this something that's worth going to print? Because part of the challenge with doing a book versus speaking is, when you are speaking, you can kind of workshop ideas. I'm going to present a story, I'm going to present an idea, and if it didn't work, like, okay, I'll try again next week, right? But when you finish a book, it's done. Like, it's really, really hard to go back and make, oh, I didn't like this, I should rearrange the chapters, and this whole concept doesn't actually make sense. Like, it's really difficult. So you really want to think that through ahead of time. And so how does a speaker know if the idea that they have is good enough that it's ready to start writing a book out of?
Yeah, good question. Well, speakers are pretty uniquely positioned to do this well because you are constantly getting feedback on that idea. Like, something that Ariel and I ask people a lot when they come to us and they're like, we have a book idea. I want to, especially if they want a traditional publish, which means they've got to turn it into a proposal, which is a huge undertaking. Proposals are at least 50 pages and they require all kinds of, a huge amount of work. One thing we often ask people is, like, have you experimented with this? And have you done anything else with this idea before you decided to write a book out of it? Have you posted about it on social media anywhere? Have you written a blog post? Have you spoken about it anywhere? And so speakers who are constantly testing their idea have a huge advantage here. How do you know when it's really ready? Well, I mean, I would imagine if you're constantly getting booked, if people are really responding well in your crowds, if you just are finding like something is resonating over and over again, that means you have a good idea, and it also means that you're going to have proof of concept when you take it to an agent or editor. If you can say, I've spoken about this on so many stages with this certain amount of people, directly to the exact kind of audience that I want to write a book for, traditional publishers specifically, they are not risk takers. They want a sure bet. They want as much proof as you can give them that you have tested your idea and you know that it works. And speakers can do that regularly. Now, in terms of how do you land on that big idea, there's a number of ways to get there, like Ariel said, to that unique angle that adds something to a conversation that's already going on. And in our book, we go over lots of frameworks you can use to try and land on that big idea. It might even help in your speech writing. If you're trying to differentiate yourself as a speechwriter, you can, look at other people who are either writing or speaking on your niche. Again, find that missing piece. Sometimes voice can be a differentiator. Like when Ariel and I went to write the book proposal for Hungry Authors, that's our book. Hungry Author, there are a lot of books on writing. Like we accept that. It's not a super, distinguished niche. There's a lot of books out there. But a lot of people who write about writing, they either focus primarily on the craft of writing and not the actual business publishing side of it. Or if they do focus on the business publishing side of it, they're like these sort of industry long-termers who have been in it for years, and they're sort of writing from this lofty place of, looking down on you, sort of newbie writer. Maybe you can get in. I'll share my wisdom with you as a gatekeeper. And we were like, we wanted to distinguish ourselves in voice. Our book is accessible. It's fun. It's from somebody who writes like a cheerleader and a coach, not sort of a guru who, is very far and separated from the reader. And we address both craft and publishing, like the craft of writing and how to get published. So like that's just an example of finding something in your niche that's missing. You can distinguish yourself with voice. You can combine two ideas that, might not naturally go together. You can, like Ariel said, draw a line in the sand and come at it with like sort of a controversial take. Like everyone is saying this, but I believe this. You can, there's a lot of different frameworks that we have for sort of figuring out your big idea. But the main takeaway is contribute something new to a conversation that's already going on, and then test it through speaking or blogging or something and see if you get a reaction.
So let's assume that then you've got a solid idea and like, okay, there's something here. And again, hopefully that as speakers, we've done some validation from that, ideally through speaking, but there's something there. You're like, okay, I got a good idea. And also like ideally I've spoken on this before. Maybe I've given a keynote or, some workshops on this. So I've got something there. It's not like I'm starting completely from a blank screen, but when you go like, all right, I've got a 30, 45, 60-minute keynote that I've presented a bunch. How do I go from taking that and turning it into a book? Because like when you are just staring at a blank screen and a flashing cursor, you're like, I just don't even know where to begin. And even if I manuscript out my talk, like, okay, that gets me a few pages, but certainly not getting me enough to turn into a book. So what's the process from there of going from like, all right, I got a good idea, I'm confident in the idea, to like, now I have a manuscript, something I can work off of?
Yeah.
Yeah.
A
So
good
this
question.
is our favorite thing to talk about, which is book mapping. And we believe so much in this concept. Okay, so you're going to start by mapping out your reader's transformation tale. So you're going to start with, where are they now? What are the pain points that they have? What do they want to accomplish? What do they want to be different in their lives? And what's getting in the way of what they want? That's the problem that you're going to have to solve in your book. But we also want to know, like, how is it affecting them? What's the cost? What is, like, why is this so urgent to them, right? So you kind of have to do a deep brainstorm and really like dig deep to put yourself in your reader's shoes of like, okay, what are the pain points? And again, speakers have a huge advantage here because you've been hearing this for years probably at this point, and you've already been speaking with people and you already kind of know this stuff. So you're like, oh, it's just so obvious. But getting that out on paper is the first step. So that's kind of the first step, is like, okay, what's my reader's current state? Then you have to do some brainstorming. All right, when I solve that problem for them, how is their life going to be different? That's their transformed state. And that whole thing, that's what we call their transformation tales, that whatever that journey is from current state to transformed state. So the transformed state, we want to know, like, what are they knowing, thinking, and doing differently by the end of your book? And then as this part two of that, what's the outcome going to be? Ideally, the outcome ties it all the way back to whatever they wanted at the beginning, right? They're going to finally get that thing that they wanted. So that's kind of the overall structure. And then you have to go, okay, well, how are we going to get them from that current state to the transformed state? Whatever comes in between, that's kind of the bulk of the mapping that you have to do. So In part 2 of our book, we lay out a pretty step-by-step guide to mapping this out and kind of thinking through it in layers. So first you're thinking about the overall transformation. Then you're thinking about, all right, how am I going to really codify that into steps or pieces, or, how am I going to like organize this into parts? What are like the big chunks of the process that I need to really clarify? And then from there, looking at, all right, what are the chapters of this book going to be? And then within the chapters, what am I going to fill each chapter with? What are the arguments of each chapter? And how does each piece kind of build on what came before it? But then also, how does each piece kind of lead up to that overall transformation? So it's probably sounds a little bit complicated, but we've got, it's actually a really intuitive process. And that's when a lot of readers say, like, oh, this book flows so well, or it just makes so much sense, or oh my gosh, it just, kind of moved from piece to piece. That's what we're aiming for, is that really intuitive structure to your ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how you're going to go about thinking about, how do I fill 50,000 words of this one idea?
Right.
Well, and Ariel, wouldn't you say too that often when someone comes to us and they've got a keynote, like a pretty solid keynote already, I'm like, oh my gosh, we probably have a working structure already then. Because often speakers who've been giving the same keynote for a long time and have studied some sort of, formatting, like a speech of some kind, like books are not all that different. Like you tell them what you're going to tell them, you tell them, and then you tell them what you told them, more or less. Like that's an oversimplification. But if you've got a working keynote that has structure that you've been honing for a while, you probably have the bones of a book. And almost every speaker that I've known who has like a tight, 90 or 60-minute speech that they've given a lot, they almost always have more to say about it than just that.
Hmm.
And
Gotcha.
so maybe that's a book.
So one from that point though, let's say like, okay, I write all this out there, and I think it's important to note there, like you said, kind of on the mapping part, that sometimes that stuff, doing that ahead of time, like saves so much time down the road. And this is true in just life. If you want to go on a road trip, if I'm in Nashville and I want to drive to California, I can just like, okay, I'm going to get my car and just start driving west, and hopefully eventually I get there. But like if I take an extra minute and say, okay, what's the best possible way to get from point A to point B, and save that and spend that time up front, it's going to ultimately save significant time down the road there, literally and figuratively. So let's talk about this. Once you you finish a manuscript there, and I think at that point it can be easy to think like, okay, I wrote a book. I'm good to go. And like at that point, it's like maybe the hard part's really beginning of the editing process. And so you mentioned, let's say you're doing a book that has, let's say 50,000 words. Well, you may actually have written 60, 70, 80,000 words. And now you start to go into the chopping block. And so talk to us about like the editing process, what is involved in that. And also there's like various types of editing. Sometimes we just think like,
Yeah.
I need to send my English teacher through looking for grammar and punctuation, but there's a lot more that goes into it. So what's then the cutting and editing process look like?
Okay, great question. I love this too. So, okay, we talk about editing in 3 phases. Phase number 1 is make it work, which means at kind of that high level, are all of the pieces working together? This is when, after you've been, just living in the weeds of your book, you're like, oh my gosh, I can't look at this thing anymore. You've just been like breathing it day in and day out for so long. We say, take a break, put it on the back burner for a couple weeks, and then come back to it. And when you come back to it, you are not diving right into the weeds again. You are looking at it back at that high level. So you're coming back to your transformation tale. This is why we say, like, make a transformation tale, and we have an actual like structure for that, so that you can come back to it after you are done writing your book and say, is what I actually did aligned with what I meant to do? And so when you're looking at your transformation tale and the actual end result manuscript, you can say, okay, do I need to change? Like, has the vision changed at all? And do I, am I doing that very intentionally, or did I go off track with my manuscript at all? And I realize, like, oh my gosh, I've got this like crazy thing in chapter 4 that actually does not contribute to the transformation of my reader at all, and that's got to get cut. So coming back to that transformation is a really good way to make decisions about what stays and what goes. If you are knowing, like, oh my gosh, I've got 20, 30,000 words I'm going to need to cut here to make this accessible, everything gets filtered through the lens of, does this contribute to my reader's transformation? And if it does, how? And is it really necessary? So that's kind of step one. That's the make it work part. Then step two is make it right, in which we are saying, like, make sure it sounds like you, make sure that it feels good to you, make sure that, you know, the voice is right, that you're engaging the reader at all the right places. And of course, we've got, like, you know, ways that you can engage the reader throughout a chapter. Make sure that the content is all correct. So, like, now would be a good time to check all of your statistics and be like, is that actually still true? I've been saying
Yeah.
this, you know, data point for like the past 5 years in all my talks, but is that actually accurate still? Now would be a good time to, like, refine all of that. Then phase three is going to be make it pretty, which is what people typically think about with editing, which is like the grammar and the punctuation and the spelling. That stuff you save for last, because if you come back to the manuscript and you realize, oh my goodness, chapter 4 actually needs to be chapter 7, and chapter 7 actually needs to go, and chapter 6 now needs to become chapter 2. If you're making like massive moves, you do not want to worry about periods and exclamation marks and M dashes versus N dashes at that point in time, because you want to handle all the big stuff first and then do all the small stuff at the end. And honestly, you can have someone else do the small stuff, right? Like, you
Yeah.
can have Grammarly, or there are AI tools. You could use ChatGPT to help you copy edit your book. And honestly, they're probably going to do a better job, because by this point, you have spent so much time in your manuscript that you can't see it clearly anyway. And you're going to get to reading your audiobook and realize, holy cow, there's all these mistakes.
What the heck is an M dash or an N dash? What's the difference there?
Oh gosh. Okay.
I don't think I've ever heard that. So I
Oh.
know someone's driving down the road right now going like, okay, hang on. What is this? What did she say?
Okay. Well, we could have a whole conversation about grammar, and maybe I'll send you like a grammar girl podcast to
No,
listen
no,
to
don't
if
do
you
that.
want to, like, really go deep down that
Yeah.
weed. M dash sets apart like a phrase that is related but tangential from the original phrase. That's
Okay.
not clear at all.
Okay.
Um, and then an N dash is used to kind of separate numbers usually, or to show a range, but
Okay.
they're on your keyboard, they're like next to each other, and
Okay.
the process to getting them is really similar. And so a lot of people confuse those two things.
Okay. All right. Now we're clear. All right. Now we know.
Yeah.
Okay. One thing you touched on there is like a chat GPT or AI. And this is obviously something that's become way more common just in general in life. And so how do you see AI fitting into the ideation, the writing, the editing, the publishing part of doing a book?
Yeah, good question. We get asked this a lot now. It's a great tool. So, like Ariel said, it can do like proofreading pretty well, like the grammar stuff, like Grammarly. That's basically an AI tool that can help you fix basic grammar things. We have, I mean, it's getting better every day, so I'm sure its capabilities will, advance rapidly. But we will often use it to as like a sounding board or like an idea generation tool, to give feedback on different things, or be like, I need a story about this, and see what it can come up with. I have not found it to be incredibly helpful in my ghostwriting process just yet. Like, I have tried to feed it, like, a lot of what my writing process looks like when I write with somebody else is taking the transcripts of our conversation. I mean, this is a lot of what we did when we worked on your book, Grant, is you take the transcripts and the recording of calls that we have about your content and your ideas, and then I
Yeah.
turn that into a chapter of a book. So I have experimented a lot with asking ChatGPT to do that, or another AI tool, just like taking rough material and trying to get it to turn it into a well-written chapter of a book. And I found that, like, it cannot do that very well at all yet. I'm, again, that may change, but you know, it hasn't been that helpful in that way. And we've asked it, like, randomly, we fed it some basic information and been like, write a book proposal about this. And it will get certain parts right. Like, it's really good. It's halfway decent anyway at like the comp title section, where it can come up with similar titles to the book you want to write, which is really helpful. But does it write a really good overview and really, in a compelling way, talk about the value proposition of your book? No, not really. Like, still very much, we need like a human touch for that. But you can like, it's really good when you're stuck. Like, I want to write a book about this. I'm having like, give me a rough outline about a book about how to become a writer, or like do some research for me real quick on like what people want to know about the publishing industry. Like, it can crank out lots of great ideas about that. Is it giving you anything really unique, anything really voicey, anything with a sharp angle? No, you probably need your own beautiful brain for that. But like, it can, yeah, I mean, it can give you a lot of rough information and do some of the like annoying proofreading for you. And so in that way, it probably speeds up a lot of the process, but it in no way is replacing like human writers yet.
Yeah. I think, and that's been my experience as well. And just from talking with others, is it's kind of it can be a good
Yeah.
collaborator in certain categories and certain parts of the process. But yeah, if you just said, "Hey, write me a leadership book," like, good luck with
Yeah.
that. Like, that's not going to
Yeah.
work. And the reality is like it's probably never going to get to that degree because, like, again, like we've touched on earlier, part of what makes a book unique is you and putting your work into it. So you don't necessarily just need a robot to regurgitate a couple of ideas or thoughts to create some type of book. Let's wrap up with this. And there's a lot more that we could be covering in terms of just like then the cover design and the printing and the marketing and sales of the book. But for someone who's going like, okay, I'm intrigued in doing a book, but kind of similar to speaking is like I just have a lot of like doubts and insecurities and fears and worries of just like, does the world really need another book on XYZ topic? And why should I write it? And why should I get up there on stage to speak? And why should I be the one that does a book on this? Like, there's other people who are better than this or have sold more copies than I would ever sell and who have bigger platforms and names. And so for a speaker who is going like, I'm intrigued by a book, but I just have those doubts and insecurities and fears, what would you say to them?
You want to go first or you want me to go?
Sure. I would say, I mean, it sounds a little trite, but it's true. No one can say it like you. And if you have done your research and you've done your homework to really have something that is different from what else is being said out there, then I really do see it as like it's not that you have an obligation to share that thing, but you have a massive gift that you could be giving to your readers and to your audience. And doing it in the form of a book helps to put it in more people's hands and make it accessible in a way that it might not be accessible to people who can't afford to go to, this conference where you're speaking, or who can't afford to hire you for coaching, in depth, or who can't, engage with you in any other way, but they can't afford $25 for a book. So in my mind, why wouldn't you do that? If you know that you've got a gift to share with people, then you should do it. And there are so many people available to help you get it done. And just like everything else, just like you probably went through when you were, a baby speaker, you had a lot of self-doubt about whether you could do it. You had a lot of fear probably about stepping out on the stage. We work with writers all the time who have those exact same fears about the writing process. Just like anything else you do, it's a skill that you learn, and it takes a long time and it takes a lot of hard work and effort, but absolutely anyone can do it. And we have seen people totally transform their lives when they take the courage to step out and write a book. So in my mind, the benefits are just limitless, and you are also helping the world. So why not?
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Liz, anything to add
well,
there?
just that every single person that we've ever worked with has doubts about whether they can or should. And these are people who have multi-million dollar businesses. They have 4 million Instagram followers. They've got multiple six figures of email subscribers. I mean, these are people who you'd think would have all the justification in the world that they have something worth sharing. And they still worry, am I good enough? Do I deserve to write this? Can I do it? So everybody feels that. It's totally normal, but everybody deserves to tell their story. And like Ariel said, this is something you can learn. You don't have to be mega talented to write a book. You just have to learn a few simple guidelines and practices, and you can write a really, really good book that reaches the audience that it's meant to. And you don't have to have, I mean, I feel like our book actually has this in common with yours, Grant, because I can remember even a line from yours that's something like, in the best possible way, you don't have to be special to do this. Like, you don't have to
Right.
be, there's a line in your book that's something like, you don't have to, I don't know if we were like, talking about that guy that landed on the Hudson. But I think we even said, like, you don't have to like have landed a plane on the Hudson to like have a story to like become a speaker. Like, you don't have to have some sort of insane thing happen to you to want to write a book and have it be really successful and have it move people. You can just, have something to say. And we can teach you how to do that. It doesn't take a lot of, innate talent. You can learn it.
Yeah. Well, and we've been kind of alluding to it throughout the entire conversation, but the new book, Hungry Authors, is out now. So make sure you check that out. Tell us real quick, tell us about the book. Who should get the book? What's it about? What else is it going to cover?
Yeah. So the subtitle is This Indispensable Guide to Planning, Writing, and Publishing a Nonfiction Book. So it is for nonfiction writers. It's broken down into 4 parts where we'll teach you how to come up, like lay the foundation. We'll talk about the mindset of becoming a writer, how to plan out your book, how to come up with a big idea, define your audience. And then part 2 is all about mapping, which is our secret sauce. We touched on that here in the conversation. We also run small group cohorts of mapping out your book. So we teach you how to map it out before you write a single word. You'll know exactly what you're going to write. So you don't have to wing it or worry that it's going to be good. If you have a book map, there is no way you can write a bad book. I promise you. And then we'll talk about the actual writing process and tell you how to, actually click, clack on the keys and get it done. And then publishing. And the last part will cover the different kinds of publishing and how to go about each one if you want to. Then that's pretty much it.
Awesome. And where can we find the book?
Well, it's on.
You can get it on Amazon, bookshop.org, wherever you want to buy books, you can get our book.
Awesome. And the website is hungryauthors.com. Again, hungryauthors.com. So check that out. Liz, Ariel, congrats on the new book. And thanks for taking a couple minutes to share your wisdom and insights with us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Grant. Thanks for having us.